Now the sound will run from it, through this wire, onto the record.
What's this wire doing here? It's dangerous.
Since the invention of sound recording and throughout the golden age of Hollywood in particular, films and TV shows have always had something to say. From grand cinematic epics to small primetime comedies, film and television seem more often than not to include some form of a message or another.
Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Now, the golden rule says that you're supposed to be honest and square dealing with other folks.
Whether religious philosophies told through ancient stories, cautionary tales told in the shadow of back alleys, or small-town familial dramas being wrapped up with a nice, palatable little moral lesson, the inclusion of messaging seemed almost to be intrinsically tied to this form of storytelling. As screenwriting became more sophisticated, however, the neat little moral lessons spelled out to the audience gave way to subtlety, allowing the sole focus to be placed on the story, and for said audience to come to the conclusions presented by the filmmakers on their own, as well as others that maybe weren't even intended, making for a more dynamic and personal viewing experience. In recent years, we've seen a return to overt messaging in films and TV series, to the point where the message seems to have taken precedence over the story and the film itself, which raises the question, should the message take higher priority than the story? In this past month, we've seen two major examples of this, but each with a different reception from the viewer. Barbie and Sound of Freedom are two films that are, in essence, two opposite sides of the same coin, both prioritizing their message to the point of being overshadowed by it, but with different approaches, resulting in different outcomes. First, before we look at the specifics of the filmmaking, there is one aspect highlighting the differences in approach that can't be overlooked: the marketing. While the filmmaker doesn't have final control over this part of the process, specifically with the final cut of the trailers, they will absolutely be aware of it, and can have their own influence on the process to an extent through use of social media. With Barbie, the advertisements, again most specifically the trailers, were structured around concealing the film's message and presenting Barbie as nothing more than a fun, summertime comedy, a sort of harmless popcorn flick where you could just turn off your brain and enjoy at a very surface level with the whole family. Because of its presentation as nothing more than a lighthearted comedy, Barbie's inclusion of heavy-handed messaging from its opening scene to its final leaves the audience feeling deceived, a feeling that completely overshadows any others that the film might have hoped to elicit. Based on the trailers and the promotional material, you might go into the film expecting something along the lines of a modern-day version of Mannequin, only to find yourself in the middle of a lecture on feminism, which, whether you agree with that film's message or not, is irrelevant. The marketing promised one thing, and the film delivered another. A deceptive sort of practice like this leads to said messaging sticking in the minds of the audience far more than it would have had the marketing been up front, and in a much more negative way. Now let's contrast this with Sound of Freedom's marketing, which placed the film's message front and center, even above the story of the film being promoted. The trailers placed their emphasis on the moments within the film, which in the actual film were actually fairly few and not overdone, that emphasized the importance of the mission, of the faith of the characters, and of the call of action on the hearts to those who are in the fight against human trafficking. Each trailer was followed by a personal message from either the filmmakers or lead actor Jim Caviezel regarding the purpose and impact of the message of the film. Sound of Freedom also implemented a pay-it-forward marketing strategy just in order to get people to see the film who might not otherwise have seen it, and spread awareness for the film's message. With this straightforward approach in marketing, Sound of Freedom drew in its audiences by way of its message, making seeing the film almost more of an act of support for the cause than simply a film-going experience, making it arguably the most memorable part of that experience, and in a positive way. Next, let's examine the filmmaking aspects that contributed to how each film's message was received, and its overwhelming impact on the viewer. Both films are based in classic mythological tales that serve to highlight the message of each respective film, but do so in opposite ways. Barbie's story, much like any Disney classic fairy tale, deals with the awakening of the unconscious self, moving away from fantasy and into reality. Barbie's decisions and actions at the end of the film, however, cause the story to deviate from the natural conclusions of this classic tale in service of its message. Now, spoilers if you haven't seen the film yet, but when Barbie returns to Barbie Land from the real world, she finds it's been taken over by Ken and his discovery of the patriarchy, finally feeling validated and in a sense of control. But instead of restoring a proper balance to her world, learning humility, autonomy, and respect for the strengths and weaknesses of all sorts of different people, becoming human as a result of a sacrifice and her old self and of her old ways, Barbie instead restores the former matriarchy, putting the Kens back in their subservient roles, continues rejecting and humiliating her boyfriend Ken, and leaves for the real world, abandoning all the others in order to pursue her own ambitions. It's this change in the classic story that was necessitated by the inclusion of its messaging, deviating from the natural conclusion the story might have otherwise taken, as the themes of each are at odds and sort of clash with one another, making the film's message stand out in a jarring way that doesn't naturally fit. Contrast this with Sound of Freedom, which also tells a very simple mythological tale. Again, spoilers, Sound of Freedom tells a classic heroic tale of a man journeying into the recesses of hell to rescue an innocent girl from the clutches of a monster, reuniting her with her family and restoring peace to their home. It tells a simple tale and sticks to that simple formula, allowing its message to stay at the forefront of the viewer's mind in a way that might not otherwise have worked had an attempt to change the classic tale in an attempt to try and grab the audience's attention. In essence, it takes a less is more strategy, and because of this, it works very well. Now lastly, let's discuss how each film chose to present its message. In Barbie, cinema's golden rule of show, don't tell is for the most part disregarded. In context of engagement, it does provide small visual cues during changes between settings, like with Barbie Land being composed like a stage, bright hair lights on the characters, and wider shot composition to showcase the sets, and the real world keeps a more naturalistic approach to lighting and with tighter shots. However, when it comes to the message of the film, nothing in the visuals is given to support this, and the filmmakers instead opted for repeated, heavy-handed dialogue and narration to communicate their message, hammering it into the brains of the audiences to the point that it completely takes over the film, becoming the main thing the film is remembered for. With Sound of Freedom, the approach is, again, the opposite, allowing for its haunting visuals to speak for themselves. That's not to say the film is silent and doesn't include lines on its message, but they are few and convey less than the actual images. Take, for example, the film's beautiful final shot, which not only serves as a conclusion of the story, but gives a subtle cue as to the work still to be done in the fight against child trafficking, with a single bright spot in the frame surrounded by darkness. It's a subtle yet effective shot to end the film on, giving one last poignant reminder before the credits roll of the film's purpose, cementing the message in the audience's mind. Well, all my fellow film nerds, that is it for today. Remember to keep your lighting soft, your focus sharp, and I'll see you next time.
Well, Beaver, today girls can be doctors and lawyers too, you know.